The spectre of territorial division looms as potential peace talks amidst Trump's claims intersect with Saudi-hosted diplomacy between Zelensky and Putin. While Ukrainian forces inflict significant losses, battlefield complexities, especially in Crimea and the Donbass, fuel concerns of a fragmented solution. NATO and Europe brace for the ripple effect as the risk of protracted war clashes with a hasty ceasefire. Can diplomacy transcend political maneuvering, or will the interconnected global landscape descend into further instability with the unresolved question of ceasefire and the balance and the enforcement hanging in the balance? I'm Rehan Morsi and welcome to Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
According to Newsweek, the U.S. negotiator Steve Witkoff highlighted that peace talks between Russia and Ukraine have stalled due to disagreements over territory seized by Moscow, including Crimea. Despite progress in discussions, Kyiv insists that Russia must relinquish these regions before proceeding with peace efforts. The U.S. and Saudi Arabia have been involved in mediating talks with President Putin, agreeing to a limited ceasefire. However, the territory status remains the central issue as Russia claims them based on disputed referendums. Ukraine and its allies reject its legitimacy. Witkoff emphasized that Ukraine must make territorial concessions for a quicker resolution, although Ukrainian leaders, including President Zelensky, have firmly rejected such demands, making the path to peace uncertain. The Washington Post has reported that indirect talks between Russia and Ukraine, mediated by the U.S., are underway in Saudi Arabia, focusing on a proposed maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea. Despite claims of progress, the two sides remain deeply divided, with Russia pushing for narrow concessions, such as halting attacks on energy infrastructure, while Ukraine seeks a comprehensive ceasefire. The discussions highlight Moscow's strategic interests in naval truce, given Ukraine's dominance in the Black Sea using advanced drones. Meanwhile, grain shipments and energy security remains contentious issues, with Europe struggling to assert a role amid the US-Russia-centric diplomacy. Europe faces pressure to bolster its defense commitments and support Kyiv independently. For now, achieving lasting peace appears distant, with both sides entrenched in maximalist demands and geopolitical maneuvering complicating efforts towards a resolution. Can diplomacy triumph over devastation, as Trump claims negotiators divide
Trump's recent claim that negotiators are dividing up plans has reignited debates about the feasibility of a full ceasefire, with Saudi Arabia co-hosting talks between Zelensky and Putin. However, whether giving up Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea will lead to lasting peace. This conflict directly affects NATO, Europe, and thus the global balance of power, and any partial solution threatens long-term instability. Militarily enforcing a ceasefire is fraught with challenges, particularly along contested borders where past violations undermine trust. Recent frontline updates reveal Ukrainian forces eliminating significant Russian troops and equipment, yet neither side appears willing to concede given their battlefield leverage. Historically, Territorial proceeds for renewed tensions rather than enduring stability, while Trump's mediation role adds intrigue exacerbate uncertainties. Mechanisms ensuring compliance, such as robust international monitoring, are essential but elusive. The war's humanitarian toll underscores urgency, with civilians bearing the brunt of prolonged conflict. International stakeholders must weigh the risk of rushed deals against escalating casualties, ensuring any resolution aligns with global security and ethical imperatives. From battlefields to boardrooms, finding a solution transcends political gamesmanship. It is vital for millions affected by this protracted crisis. Balancing immediate cessation of hostilities with remains paramount. The question persists: can diplomacy end the bloodshed and accountability?
Analyze the Russia-Ukraine war's fate and the most recent updates when it comes to the negotiation process. We're joined from Moscow by Dr. Olga Krasniak, an international relations professor, and from Brussels by Dr. Kamila Zarachta, Romanowska, an EU Law Security Studies professor. Thank you both for joining us here on Think Tank. Let's start off with Dr. Olga. Given the Suds attack, how does Moscow perceive Europe's position, and what are the most realistic terms for direct energy negotiations?
Well, I think Russia's position is very clear, and Russia does not change its position since the beginning of this military conflict in Ukraine. So for Russia, it's important to provide its safety and security, and not allowing military forces or some hostile forces just to be on Ukrainian territory, because Ukraine is considered as a Russian backyard. So it's a totally different situation with Ukraine in comparison to maybe with different countries, for historical, cultural reasons. And of course, Russia would not ever accept that. So this territory of Ukraine would be Russia.
Or give some sort of concession when it comes to the lands that is already annexed?
I think we cannot even use the concession to Russia, because Russia would never accept anything that would not align with its own interests. So no, it's our territory. Here is no to concession or to give back or anything. I think that would be the opposite, just to move even further.
Okay, Dr. Kamila, if we can get your opinion, amidst the US-Russia mediation in Saudi Arabia, how do you assess the EU's assertions strategic assuring long-term stability, considering the risk of a fragmented solution where the US is pushing for, Ukraine to give in and give concessions?
Well, the first thing is that the annexation, I would say, when it comes to the Russia, is a quite long history of its use as a diplomatic tool, especially just before the war. So clearly it will be an issue here when it comes to the global acceptance of such. But more importantly, we can see now that this is really Game of Thrones, if I can use this comparison when it comes to the situation in there, because obviously with the change of the leadership in the United States, everything changed as well globally. We have to take into account that now what we really should looking for is to have more and more involvement of the Gulf states, especially in the terms of maritime security globally, of elimination of global hunger globally as well. Because the China influence will rise, so maybe it will be a good idea as well to ensure that China and, for instance, India are just alongside not only the Saudi Arabia, but as well Qatar, but as well Kuwait, but as well there should be more balance and there should be some distance, because the last thing we need is more bloodshed. and the bloodbath basically being creating between very long hostility. And very important that when the whole annexation of Crimea, of Donbass started, there was no, in that time, there was no enough effort and there was not enough action.
Yes. But I mean,
side.
what I'm trying to get at here is,
Yeah.
since the US is actually trying to push for a ceasefire of up, will the EU somehow back, the Ukrainian side so that they don't have to make as much when it comes to concessions towards, a peace agreement?
Yes, absolutely. This is exactly what Ukraine is trying to achieve as well. They're trying to ensure that their backup as some of the NATO states, excluding US, as well as EU countries, maybe as well in the big steps, OSCE, Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, will back them up in the context of their territorial claims as well, to regain the territory which before Maidan actually, and before everything which erupted afterwards with Yanukovych and Mr. Zelensky taking the steer wheel of the country has happened. But unfortunately, the problem is that the prospect of comprehensive ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine is so uncertain because there are very deep entrenched geopolitical and military factors, which we have to take into account. US president has claimed that negotiation involves dividing territory. This is something which EU would like to support Zelensky, and Zelensky is really trying to have an extremely, extremely stiff stance on it. But the problem is it more important as a human being, as a civilization as well? And I'm not talking about Western, Eastern, Islamic, Christian, but human civilization as such. Is it more important to us to actually ensure the peace, ensure the ceasefire, to enable people to actually get back together to their places, basic medical treatment, or we are going to question legitimacy, feasibility, and international acceptance? Well, ceasefire requires really a big compromise. The problem here is that the idea of territorial concession contradicts Ukraine's focus on sovereignty and the West's position against legitimizing Russian territorial annexation. They didn't do it when it was Georgia. Unfortunately, now they're stepping in and they're really stiff on this, which really, unfortunately, which is really unfortunate to actually use all those delicate and fragile diplomatic would be possible. It's very similar situation to those with Israeli state.
Yes, we see the similarities. But Dr. Olga on this. Now you've seen. I don't know if you've heard Dr. Camilla's opinion when it comes to the concessions and trying to push for a ceasefire for the better of the region and the world and so forth. But beyond the immediate energy concerns that Moscow is discussing, how does Moscow assess the long-term territorial resolution when it comes to the Ukraine, especially regarding the security architecture for Eastern Europe, and as Dr. Camilla spoke about, the security of the region and the world as a whole?
Well, the short answer to this question would be to have good relations with Russia, because that would mean the only 100 guarantee that the safety and security will be in the region of Eastern Europe in particular. And if European Union promotes the rhetoric of some humanitarian, this narrative, just the value of human life, maybe European Union should stop supply Ukraine with weapons. So, and in this case, we see certain rhetoric goes against real actions coming from European Union, but Russia's position, Moscow position, was explicitly spoken. So, and like I said previously, so we need to provide our safety and security. And we see these realities in Ukraine. And on the other side, we see Western countries. What they want to contain Russia. And it's not just only Russia. They want to contain China. They want to contain, or maybe just to influence the Middle East. And this leads us to the global architecture of the world order. And I think the dominance of Western countries led by the United it is coming to an end. It is something what Western countries need to acknowledge.
Okay, Dr. Camilla, if we can get your opinion, because it looks like you're not very happy with Dr. Olga's answer right there. If you could, sort of give us your feedback.
Actually, I have to say that I am mesmerized about this the monologue, because it's the problem is that this is not only the peace doesn't rely on everyone accepting Russia. The peace talk and the ceasefire and the diplomacy is about the conversation, the little steps we are taking, the mutual respect. It's difficult to actually have mutual respect if someone is using a war as a diplomatic tool, and the approach to diplomacy revolves around a complete annexation, and strategy creates irreversible facts on the ground from military occupation. Then seeking diplomatic negotiation from position of strength is quite contradictory to the diplomatic. It's actually use
But they are in a position of strength, don't you think? Like, I mean, especially since the US is pushing.
Yes, that's actually the thing. The position of strength is not Russia who has it, but actually the other states, the US, the Gulf states, the China, the India as well. Let's not forget about a quite strong economical aspect when it comes to the war. For the countries involved, quite often is actually a tool to actually re-innovate the whole economy. But in the context the war actually takes place, it's not the thing at all. There are huge damages from the both sides, and let's look at this for a bit of far perspective. In this war, there is no one who is winning. Everything and everyone is at loss because of the damage, because of the loss of the humans. The parties are really suffering, and this is opposite from what my what the Dr. Olga has said. I'm sorry if I mixed the name. I'm very sorry. But when in 2022 Russia formally annexed 4 Ukrainian regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, following a sham referendum, using this as a bargaining chip in diplomatic negotiation, they actually did a very proactive action, which showed a security concern of the global. Actually didn't take into account US point of view. The problem here is that our annexed territory is no longer an option. We are negotiating. If we are negotiating, but we are not giving you anything at all and just forget about it.
Yes.
It's not negotiation. It's actually
if we could also give Dr. Olga, the right to respond to these. I mean, obviously she might have something to say about that. Dr. Olga, do you have a response for what Dr. Camilla was talking about, and the idea of annexing territory, and it's
totally twisted narrative, because the fact says that from 2014 to 2022, official Kiev, they considered Eastern Ukrainian territory, Lugansk and Donetsk, as separatists. And they launched this anti-terrorist campaign against these people. So basically, they've been shelling and bombing Donbass for a few years, for 8 years. And Russia came to rescue, basically. And if official Kiev forget this position, probably should remember this.
Okay.
Well, let's not forget as well that it was not previously keep here a very fragile compromise stance, because the problem is as well that Western unity is as well, while NATO and EU continues supporting and concerned about the war fatigue. And this is actually something which we can see from the both sides. But that's the reason why we really can rely on the states who actually have a fresh perspective, who actually can look at this from a very different angle. Taking aside the history, like Saudi Arabia, like Qatar, like Egypt, like China, because they don't have what my predecessor said, they don't have the things which we do have as well, which is long-term experience as well as long-term certain, I don't want to use the word hostility, but reservation would be better. That's the reason why we actually ensure that this is going to, for instance, Saudi Arabia or Qatar or Kuwait or Egypt will co-host the peace talks between Zelensky and Putin, because this actually will create a neutral plan and the area of cooperation and conversation, and that's most important, the conversation, and without a hostility. And I think,
but the direction doesn't seem to be going that way, Dr. Camilla. I mean, it seems like even Trump himself, came out with a statement saying let's divide the territory. It doesn't seem like this is the direction that these negotiations are going to go for. Do you think there will be concessions, specifically from the Ukrainian side, or will this ceasefire negotiation, fall apart?
Well, the problem is that how interconnectedness of this war affects both NATO, Europe, and on whole global power dynamic. And while we are looking at this as a more regional conflict, actually this global reliance power affecting NATO, affecting EU, and it's really have a very broad international relations, including the strengthening of the Russia on the global stage. Not because of the Russia itself, it's because of the lack of stability when it's and the straight line when it comes to the policy and the approach to global about the war itself. For Trump and for United States, as we can see in US aid and we can see withdrawing from UNHCR, it's about America first.
Yes.
And we are just putting all those contacts on those conflicts, on those initiatives, which are quite good, we're really comprehensive, but they are dividing money from helping globally to focus
the Ukraine, but also to create this deal, Moscow must approve the deal itself. What kind of red lines does the Moscow regime have when it comes to these negotiations? What will stop it completely or halt it from happening, especially given the climate, the geopolitical climate right now?
Like I said, Russia was mentioning some certain conditions which will not be accepted. It is the deployment of foreign military troops on the territory of Ukraine, or which is left of Ukraine. So it's a neutral status for Ukraine. It should be on the agenda. And the total demilitarization of Ukraine. But what is important here? So diplomacy. It's traditional understanding, so it is not something what comes first. It's something what comes second after some military enforcement. And we need to look what is happening in the battlefield, because it is something what negotiating parts. And in this case, we see Russia has already won this military conflict, and it's not just to come to an end, but just to move even further. In this case, looking what is happening on the battlefield, looking at the capacity of Russian military, economic capacity, this is something what leads us to the question, so how diplomatic negotiations will follow. So definitely diplomacy comes second.
Security while still maintaining a unified stance when it comes to this conflict?
Yes, I mean, that's a very good question, and it's the question which actually is shedding a good night's sleep from the eyes of many in Europe. And strangely and funnily enough, the answer is actually Gulf state and cooperation. We cannot rely only, first of all, European countries, especially European Union and Germany, a significant mistake relying too much on Russia when it comes to the gas supplies. It's a long-term, and it was long-term mistake that actually created a very difficult situation for the economics of European Union and European countries, but as well globally. That's the reason why its involvement and cooperation with the Gulf states came extremely handy. And this is actually something which strengthened as well position of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Kuwait, as well as
negotiators.
Talk.
I apologize.
Peace talk anchors.
Yes. Yeah. I apologize, but I have to cut you off there because we're out of time for this episode. But thank you both so much for joining us. That was Dr. Olga Krasniak, International Relations Professor, and Dr. Kimna Zarjata, Romanowska, EU Law Security Studies Professor. Thank you both for your insights, and thank you for joining us here. As the territorial division threats looms over Ukraine and Russia, peace talks continue to face significant hurdles. With Europe and NATO on edge, the path to lasting stability remains uncertain. And this brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank. I'm Rehan Morsi. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.